The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to All You Can Eat, the podcast. Here I am, your host, Rob.
I'm the Teflon Pan Man.
And Eat, the podcast, coming to you from New York City, New York, on a relatively dreary day. It's the 16th of May. I'm very excited to be here, though, with you this evening because I have a very special guest. And I am going to introduce him in 1 minute. But because we have so much to talk about, let me just take 2 minutes to do a little housekeeping. I was quite excited to discover this week that there's a huge network called Goodreads, which you can find online. And Goodreads is basically a network of 65 million people, and Goodreads is devoted to kind of recommending books and doing book reviews. And I discovered this very week that their employees put up their summer reading plans, and one of their employees, I believe it was the director of sales, recommended as one of his summer reading books none other than Short Order Dad, One Guy's Guide to Making Food Fun and Hassle-Free. This is very exciting to me, and there you go. I just wanted to take that second to, self-promote, pat myself on the back, because now I am really super excited to introduce you to a very special guest this evening. And he is a guy, my friends, who has authored a lot of books. It's always hard, and I'm going to ask you in a second, Coleman, it's always hard to know precisely how many books. You'll maybe have a better idea than I do. When I do a count, I see that this guy has written over a dozen books, and it's not only as a book writer, he also is the founding editor of a Savoir magazine, which really was way ahead of its time, a brilliant food magazine, and has won for his writing, both as an editor and as an author and as a book writer, 10 James Beard Awards. I think you've been nominated maybe for another 10 or a dozen, and is considered one of the world's, and I am not prone to either bullshit or hyperbole, but when I say this is easily one of the world's foremost authorities on food and wine. Welcome my guest tonight, Mr. Coleman Andrews. Coleman, how are you?
I'm pretty good, and how about yourself?
You know, I gotta say, I'm like you. I'm happy to be alive. It's even though it wasn't the most beautiful day, it's fun to be able to be here tonight and hang out with you for the next hour. I'm also like you. You know, I loaded up a glass with Pinot Noir, so I'm ready to go.
All right, we're still on the right side of the grass. That's
exactly right. We're feeling good about things. We're here and we're eating and drinking. By the way, speaking of eating and drinking, I'm going to go off my own script. Did you have anything interesting to eat today?
Did I have anything interesting to eat today? I had, believe it or not, I had fried chicken for lunch.
That's good. We like that. Was it a good version?
Yeah, it was a pretty good version. And then I just had a dinner of some salmon burgers from our local fish market and some leftover rock shrimp risotto that I'd made a few days ago, and a little salad on the side.
Yeah,
I'm drinking a very nice California Riesling from Smith Madrone, which is one of my favorite wineries out in Napa.
Ah, sweet. Yeah.
But it's not sweet.
No, it's not. I meant sweet like the totality of your culinary experience there, yes.
Listen, if I could just do a little slight correction.
Please, go ahead.
I believe it's only 8 James Beard Awards. As far as my books, I've written 9 books on food in my recent life. I've co-written another 3. And then I wrote a whole bunch of different restaurant guides when I was in LA many years ago. So I guess you could say 12 plus, something like that. On the other hand, I did a thing the other night at the 92nd Street Y where I was the moderator, as it were, talking to an author named Mark Kurlansky, who's written a bunch of wonderful books. His most recent book is called Milk, a 10,000-Year Food Fracas. He's written books on cod and salt and the Basques and paper and all kinds of books, food and otherwise. So he said he'd won 2 James Beard Awards, and he said when we were up in front of the audience at the 92nd Street Y in New York City, he said, "I'm jealous of you. You have 8 James Beard Awards." I said, "Mark, if I count right, you've written 31 books." And he said, "Yeah, that's right." And so I think however many I've written, it's not all that impressive.
Yeah, the number thing is always a little tricky, to be honest with you. I've been in this situation before. Here's so like if I read up and down the list, you're right. You probably have co-authored some, which I included into the thing. You never. It's not precise unless the author himself, in your case, knows. But even on the James Beard thing, I felt confident about the 10. But correct me if I'm wrong. And there was probably
you're seeing into the future. You're anticipating.
Yes. Let's just leave it at that. The point is that here's what remains true in what I said. I can't think of anybody, and again, like I said, I'm not hyping here or anything like that. I can't think of anybody that knows more about food, not only in this country but around the world, which we're going to get to. But I thought it would be fun to start just at the beginning. You grew up in California. What are some of your earliest food memories?
Well, I believe my earliest food memory, as far as I can reconstruct it, one thing that always surprises people today is when I say that one thing that I really can't stand to eat is eggs in any recognizable form. I don't mind if they're in a souffle or ice cream or worked into something, but scrambled eggs, omelets, fried eggs, I just can't eat them. And I have a very strong memory of sitting in my high chair and with a little bib on that I think had frolicking lambs on it, if I'm not mistaken. And my mother, with a spoonful of scrambled eggs, putting them in my mouth, and I spit them out.
Right.
Whether that's because she was not a very good cook, so maybe that was
Part
her fault.
of it, right.
Or maybe there was just some chemical thing that I didn't like, and ever since then, I have not been able to eat eggs. So that's an early food memory. The other kinds of memories, which aren't quite as early, as I've written about a number of times, but most recently a memoir I published a few years ago, is that my parents, at least partially because my mother wasn't a very good cook, went out to restaurants all the time. Mm-hmm. And they took me with them a lot. And so I really came to some kind of early knowledge of food or appreciation of food, not from the kitchen, but from the dining room table or from the restaurant table.
Let me ask you this, because I read. First of all, I read the book, and you talked about, and you were at some classic kind of like Hollywood, Jason's and some of the great restaurants, but I remember also seeing somewhere along the way that your parents threw some dinner parties there in Ohio. Am I right about that?
Well, they threw parties. They weren't so much dinner parties, although they certainly did give dinner parties now and again. But when I was growing up in West Los Angeles, we had a house with a huge, they called it the playroom, and it was about 90 feet long, linoleum. It had a full wet bar, and for a period of, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years at least, they gave parties almost once a month and filled this room.
Wow.
With all kinds of Hollywood people, and I remember there'd be military that were home on leave. They would entertain there, and all kinds of LA society folks, and they'd have bartenders, and they'd have we'd have maids in pinafores serving little canapes and things like that. So that was really the entertaining that I most remembered that they did.
Do you remember food other than the canapes? I mean, do you remember the food from that experience?
I don't from the parties. I remember when we had a formal dining room, and there was one of those little buzzers on the floor that my mother could step on when she wanted whoever was in the kitchen to come in and clear the plates or bring us something else. But we ate very conventional food, very lots of meat and potatoes kind of stuff, and rice and overcooked vegetables. And one of the few things that my mother used to cook was she'd do a big roast in a big cast iron, or actually not aluminum roasting pan, and she'd put fresh raw peeled carrots on the bottom, and then little new potatoes out of a can on the bottom,
right.
And put this piece of meat on top of it with salt and pepper,
right.
And cook it for about 5 hours.
Right.
And actually, the vegetables turned out really good. They were
Right.
kind of caramelized and sticky on the bottom. But I was about 13 before I knew that roast beef wasn't gray inside.
Right. Did you? And so the restaurant experience had to be, like formidable, like that. What was it like when you started going out to these like lovely, Los Angeles restaurants at that point?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, obviously, I had access to a lot more kinds of food, and we didn't eat salads at home, for instance, and so I started eating salads, and anything new that I tried that we didn't eat at home, my mother was always very skeptical of it. She'd say, "You won't like that," and I'd say, "Well, let me try it," and then I'd say, "Yeah, I actually do like it." And she didn't know what to think of that, and so it was kind of in spite of them, I think, that I really developed a taste for good food.
Right. I feel like I had a similar experience. We had good food coming in, but my mother was, she wasn't home. She was working. My father was working, so I also didn't have great stuff growing up. So it's always interesting to me because I find that these early food experiences are the ones that make all the difference in the world. But what about what was your first kind of like food writing job?
So I started. My father was a writer, a screenwriter primarily. Although earlier in his career he'd been a newspaper writer and a radio soap opera writer and so forth, novelist. But when I was growing up, he worked for movie studios writing scripts, and he all day would be sitting at his typewriter and at home unless he was working at the studio, which happened too. But I'd see him just sitting there all day with smoke, going through 4 or 5 packs of cigarettes and letting most of them burn out in the ashtray. And I guess I just thought that writing, sitting at a typewriter, was something that guys did. And I always said if he had been out in the backyard working on cars, I'd probably be an auto mechanic now or a body shop guy, So I just a little typewriter when I was a kid, and I just thought writing was something to do. And so when I was in when I was in high school, I got a job. It had nothing to do with food, but I think one of the first times I got paid, probably the first time I got paid for writing, was the local newspaper. This was in Ojai, California, where I was for my high school years. And there was a newspaper that came out 2 or 3 times a week. And I would write for them. I'd call around all the churches and say, "What's going on? What's your news? What events do you have?" And so forth. And I'd call around to the movie. There was a movie theater, and I'd say what movies are in town. And I wouldn't write reviews, but I'd write sort of previews based on press materials and a bunch of stuff like that. And what distinguished visitors are coming through town to the Ojai Valley Inn to play golf and like that. And I got paid. I had to measure out the published inches, and I got paid 35 cents for each column inch.
Nice.
Which I always said kind of contributed to my long-windedness in writing sometimes. But so that was, I started writing like that. And when I was in college, to supplement student loans and so forth, and whatever other miscellaneous jobs I had, I started trying to sell stuff to magazines. And I'd go to the library and get these writers' magazines or writers' guides, and they'd list all the markets. So so-and-so is buying 500-word pieces on historical characters from New England for 2 cents a word or something. And I'd send stuff off, and I actually sold a few. So I started actually making a little money as a freelance writer. And then sometime probably a couple of years after I graduated, I would guess, from college, or maybe when I was a senior or something, it sort of dawned on me that, hey, I like going out to restaurants, and maybe I could write about restaurants. So there was a local underground newspaper, remember those? Yeah. And they agreed to pay me $35 per review. I got no expenses, but you could get a pretty good dinner for two for $35 or less in those days.
Right.
And so I started writing these reviews for this underground newspaper. And then the restaurant critic at the LA Times, Lois Guan, who had been there for many years, read these, and I was writing under a pseudonym, but I met her at some events at some point, and it became known to her that I was actually the person writing these, and she said, well, I'm going on vacation for a month. Would you take over my column in the LA Times?
Yes.
I said, yeah, sure. And that was big money. That was probably, $250 or $300 a column plus expenses. And so I did that for a while. And then I became a regular contributor to the Times, writing some reviews, also writing like restaurant news. And I don't know, it just kind of went on from there.
Well, let's go abroad a little bit, because you have called yourself a Francophile. You're considered the great expert on the food of Spain and Catalonia. You've written about the British table. You've written about the cuisine of Ireland. You've written about flavors of the Riviera and Italy, and obviously, the taste of America. But I guess my question, and yet if you go to the James Beard site, by the way, the recipes that are on there from you are, cold cannon and shepherd's pie, Irish.
Right.
What does a country's cuisine tell us about its, about its culture?
Well, that's a big question, and I think one of the things that has always interested me about food, and it was really the motivating idea behind all the books that I've written. The first one was Catalan Cuisine, published in 1988, 30 years ago. And the foundation of Severa Magazine and the way we approach food stories there has always been that food isn't just this sort of divertisement on the side, casual thing that you do when real life isn't going on. It's something that really is influenced by and influences almost anything you can think of: your geography, your religion, your ethnic background, your culture, your philosophical beliefs, your socioeconomic status. All of these are really interwoven with food, with the way you eat or what you eat. And so I think the question you asked has many answers in many directions, but I think what we can learn from looking at the food of a region or a culture or a people, among other things, is what they had access to, what they valued. You find all kinds of quirky things if you really get into studying things. That I was fascinated when I wrote this book on the Riviera, which was basically the Italian Riviera plus the region of Nice, which historically was more attached to Genoa than to France. Mm-hmm. And the most famous, probably, dish from that area is pesto, the famous sauce, and of course based on basil. And in doing all my research, it suddenly dawned on me that basil didn't appear in any other dish. The Ligurians used basil in pesto, period. Mm. And this seemed very weird to me because it's a very attractive herb and very, very enjoyable, and it's not overly strong like rosemary or something like that. And so why didn't they use it in all kinds of other things, like the famous caprese salad with mozzarella and tomatoes and basil? That's not Ligurian at all. That's from the south.
Right.
Why didn't they? And I would start asking people, and nobody could really answer me. The best answer I ever got was, well, pesto is a perfect sauce with the relationship of the garlic and the oil and the cheese and the basil and the pine nuts or walnuts, and so why would we do anything else with it or something?
Right, that's it.
Well, that's not the way people think today, and certainly not the way American chefs think. But that's inculcated into the culture, and it's fascinating stuff like that to me.
Yeah, I hear you.
I'll give you one more quick example about
Sure.
Ireland. Part of what I did when I was researching this book was I went to the National Library in Dublin, and they have all these estate papers going back to the 19th and in some cases the 18th century. And there were frequently cookbooks, which would be handwritten manuscripts. And they were always written in a very fine hand. They were written by the lady of the house or the maid, or for the cook. And Italian cook who was probably not very well educated and certainly not from a high social class, how to cook this fancy food, often French. And it dawned on me one day that the one food we associate above all with Ireland is potatoes, right. And there were almost no potato recipes.
Right? Why?
And I said, that's really weird. And I asked somebody, and they said, Cook already knew how to make potatoes.
So you didn't need the recipe for it.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. And somebody else said, well, the other thing was that if you were rich, you didn't need to eat potatoes. So But I think I like that Cook knew how to make potatoes, so
right.
They're not in the cookbook.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, and I want to try to avoid like the obvious questions, but one of the things that strikes me, because I, like you, spend a lot of time on a plane and have eaten around the world. Americans have a pretty low percentage of kind of passport ownership. So here's the game that I want to play from somebody who's been around. Name a few meals that are actually worth, and maybe not meals. I'll let you answer it how you want to. But the idea is that what are some meals that are actually or food experiences that are actually worth boarding a plane alone just to go have?
Well, that's the breakdown of the Michelin stars, as I'm sure you know, is that that one star restaurant is recommended, and a 2-star restaurant is worth a detour. If you're in the neighborhood, it's worth going out of your way to go to it. A 3-star restaurant, vol de voyage, it's worth the trip.
Right.
At this stage in my life, I don't know. I think about what would I actually fly somewhere to eat.
Right. That's really what my question is. At this point, where would you happily jump on a plane to go eat at this point? What would you be having?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's two sides to that question. If you said, tomorrow you can go anywhere in the world and eat at any restaurant you want to,
right? Where
would you go? And I'd say, you know what? Can I just stay home and grill some burgers and open
Okay, fine. That's because you've been everywhere, by the way.
Well, I haven't been everywhere by any means. I'm very deficient in Asia. For instance, I just had to turn down a trip to Bangkok, which I would have loved to have done. But when I think of places I'd like to go, it's not just about the food. It may be the food and the restaurant, which isn't all about the food, right. But it probably also involves just experiences that I like to have, meeting up with friends, cities I enjoy. I just had a very nice experience where I was invited to spend a couple of days in Galway in Ireland at a culinary tourism conference. And I booked myself through London for one night, and then through Dublin, and I drove across to Galway. And I got to London late. I did that same day flight where you can leave New York 8:15 in the morning and get in 8:15 at night.
Right.
And went to my hotel and walked around the corner and sat at the bar at a nice restaurant and had a nice meal alone. Next day for lunch, I went to a restaurant I like very much, the River Cafe in London, which somebody, I think it was maybe Adam Gopnik, the New Yorker writer, called the best Italian restaurant in the world, parentheses, including Italy.
Wow.
And met with a couple of British chef friends of mine, and we sat outside on a beautiful day and had a wonderful lunch, and then I got on a plane to Dublin, where I met an Irish chef friend of mine and his wife, and we went out and had a very kind of strangely attractive Chinese meal, including really good Peking duck. And I got up the next morning and drove to Galway, and it was a perfect little combination of places and people, and really enjoyable. And the whole thing, I was gone 4 nights, and I love doing that kind of thing. And I tend to travel when I do travel. My trips are pretty short, even long distances. I spent 4 nights in Singapore once, for instance. Flew all the way there, flew all the way back. I think I've been to Australia for as little as 4 days or 5 days.
Right.
And certainly I've made many trips to London or Paris or Spain for, Barcelona for 2 days or 3 days.
Right. Let me ask you this. I've been asking this question. If you had to, although I'm getting the sense, having heard this your last answer, were you going to tell me on this one? But if you had to live in one country for the rest of your life, strictly based on its cuisine, what country do you think it would be?
Well, I think it would be here, America, because more and more you can get pretty much anything. Obviously it's not the same experience of having. The place is so much a part of the experience of a meal too, and I think I like going to Mexico, for instance, and you have food that's nothing like anything you can get here, even at the really good restaurants here, good Mexican restaurants. Italian food, same thing. French food, strangely enough, I think it comes the closest. I think if you have a really good meal at Le Bernardin or Marseille or something like that, it really is. It's hard to beat that level of cooking in France. The bistro stuff is a little harder to do here, I think, ironically. But I think I'd live in America, and I would certainly live in America from a point of view of wine and spirits. Again, because you can, not just because of what's made here, which is plenty good, but also because you can get almost anything here. And with food. 20 years ago, certainly 30, 40 years ago, it was a whole different story. And products that were exotic. I remember when the first time I ever had balsamic vinegar, which was probably in 1975, 76. Nobody had heard of it unless you were an Italian, and an Italian from the region of Modena, probably.
Right.
Sun-dried tomatoes, radicchio. Right. Which today I've read that McDonald's is the world's largest purchaser of radicchio because it goes into their salads.
That's funny.
I remember when a restaurateur friend of mine in L.A., Piero Salvaggio from Valentino, he told me one time that he would order these crates of radicchio, and they'd come in, they'd have them air freighted from Italy. Half of them would be kind of wilted or rotten. He'd have to throw them away, and then he'd serve the other ones in a perfect little simple salad with olive oil and whatever. And you'd have to charge a fair amount of money for them. And people would say, why are you charging so much for red cabbage? And it just wasn't known here. Right. And these things, arugula was not known here, sun-dried tomatoes, all kinds of stuff like that. And I'm just talking about Italian, but that applies to virtually any cuisine.
Everything, yeah.
Those things did not exist here, and now we take them for granted, and they've even become, these cliches.
You remind me of a time that I interviewed Jacques Pepin, and I had asked him, because he had come here 30 years earlier, what changed, and he said that when he went into the local supermarket, he was in New York City. And he asked for, where the mushrooms were. They sent him to aisle number 6 because the mushrooms were in a can.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, the point is that I guess it's remarkable in some ways, and maybe not in others, that we now have what we now have, and not only at our disposal, but as you said, what we kind of take for granted.
Right. I hated mushrooms for many, many years because all we ever had at home were those little B&B brand mushrooms, which are little tiny mushrooms that kind of had the consistency of erasers when you chew them. And,
but even the stuff that they were stored in with that ascorbic, I mean, it was like acidic. It was like bitter.
Exactly.
It was horrible.
And I remember distinctly one time that I think it was when I was in Rome, and I was at a restaurant, and somebody was grilling this stuff, and I said, "That doesn't look like meat. What is that?" And my friend said, "Oh, those are porcini. Those are porcini caps, and they're just grilling them like a piece of meat." Oh my God, I got to taste that, and I did, and then that was the beginning of mushrooms. Same thing with olives for me, because the only olives we had
were in a can.
Were the black ones in a can with the hole in the middle, and I hated those. I hate them to this day. And so I always said, I don't like olives. I'd never go near an olive. And then I started spending time in Spain, and I remember I was sitting at a restaurant waiting for my friends to arrive, and there were olives on the table, and I tried one, and it was pretty good. And I don't know, 10 minutes later, I looked down, and the bowl was almost empty.
Right,
of course. I guess I like olives now.
Yeah, exactly. How funny how that works. Are there foods that you just will not eat, though?
Well, I mentioned eggs.
Other than eggs. Other than eggs.
I have some weird food things, which, strangely enough, coincidentally, I share with my wife, which is lucky. But and I can't tell you why. But for instance, anything pickled, I love. Pickled jalapenos, pickled cauliflower, pickled watermelon rind, a great southern specialty. Mm-hmm. Except I don't like pickles. I don't like cucumber pickles. Oh. Any variety of them, right? If the juice leaks onto my sandwich or something, it ruins it for me. And that makes no sense, because it's basically, I like cucumbers and I like other vegetables pickled. I can't tell you why. I don't like capers, and I don't like mustard or horseradish. And again, I like strong, pungent flavors, right? I eat raw chilies all the time, almost every day. And why? I don't know. But those are just things, maybe some childhood thing again. I don't know. Yeah. And other than that, I'll eat most things, and I'll eat organ meats. I like some better than others. I'll eat really any kind of vegetable you can name. And certainly, wild game and seafood, and pretty much anything like that. But I just have those weird little things, and I've come to terms with it. And I say, well, I can usually avoid those things, and I always believe that a real gourmet, quote unquote, is a very misused word, but if you really care about food, it doesn't mean that you eat everything. Right. It means to have a certain amount of discernment. Right. And you're allowed to say, I really love this, and I'll eat it anytime I see it. And this, maybe occasionally I don't mind it, and this I just don't like. That shows some discernment. Just, if you're an art lover, you don't say, I love every piece of art that's ever created. You say, I like Renaissance art, but I just don't get performance art, or vice versa. You have some kind of discernment.
This is a perfect opportunity for me to get a little bit even deeper into what it is that you do like, because here's what it is that you said, and I quote, "It is my opinion that whoever said nothing tastes as good as thin feels has probably never sat down with 3 ounces of Iranian Osetra, a stack of freshly made blinis, specifically you said the kind that are not made with pancake mix, a small bone spoon, and nobody else in the room, or attacked a steaming plateful of fettuccine Alfredo made the right way with only very rich butter and the best Parmigiano Reggiano, no cream, or addressed a big juicy bacon cheeseburger with homemade fried onion rings and a bottle of Cornat on the side." So, this sounds very, this is impressive. This is now we're talking serious food. And,
that's the tasting menu here.
well, that's what I wanted to do with you. Rather than ask you, like, if you have any bucket list meals, I thought maybe together we could put together like a 10-course fantasy meal just for fun. For example, you would say, I'm going to give you Iranian, we start off with Iranian caviar and perfect blinis. What would we drink with that, do you think?
Vodka.
Yeah, good. Now, and then, are you still up for a fettuccine Alfredo, or has something changed in your discernment, as you would?
No, I think that's one of the. I mean, there's many wonderful classic pasta dishes, but that is certainly one of them. I think, and it's fairly neutral, so it doesn't complicate things too much.
Very good. And then you have the big juicy bacon cheeseburger, homemade onion rings, and that we would be drinking with some Corona, I think, unless you want to...
or something else, hearty Rhone wine. Yeah.
Let me throw in a couple from my side here. I have a thing, and I don't know if it's just today, but I do have a thing for, like, sometimes they're called barbecued oysters. Sometimes they're called grilled oysters. I've had them out in your home state of California.
Yeah.
They blow me away. I would throw stone crabs on the menu. Those are Florida based, and I would have those things together with some fried green tomatoes. I don't know where this is coming from. As you know, I'm from New York. Fried green tomatoes, and so I didn't grow up with any of these things. And my final two to throw onto our joint menu together are something you actually mentioned before: Peking duck.
Mm-hmm.
And then I need pizza. Like, pizza turns out to be, after all my eating experience and my training, pizza turns out to be my number one.
Okay.
Do you, Coleman? Do you have like a cocktail of choice? Like if you were going to have a real cocktail, what's exciting to you cocktail wise?
Yeah, I basically the one cocktail that I have pretty much every Friday night, sometimes Saturday night, is a margarita, and I don't like margaritas that other people make.
So in other words, you have to make it yourself. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, and what is? Tell me how you make the perfect margarita, sir.
So it starts with fresh lime juice, which I squeeze limes,
right.
Key limes if I can get them. If not, then regular limes. And then I fill the shaker with ice. I pour in, and I free pour, so I'm not measuring, except it always comes out about right.
Right.
I pour in some good Blanco or silver tequila.
Right. And
a splash of Cointreau, or what I prefer and what I have now, because I bring it back every time I go to Mexico, is something called Pantroy, which is a Mexican imitation, I guess you'd say, of Cointreau.
Wow.
Costs about a fifth or a sixth of what Cointreau cost, and I actually prefer it. My wife and I did a blind tasting of the two, and it's just a little bit drier and a little bit more herbaceous than Cointreau.
How do you spell that?
Excuse me. Controy.
Okay.
And you can only buy it in Mexico. You can't buy it in this country, as far as I know.
Gotcha.
Anyway, then I shake it vigorously 40 or 50 times, let it sit for a minute, and then strain it so it's up, it's not on the rocks,
right,
into a glass with salt on the rim.
Okay.
And that's it. And the other cocktails, when I'm out, I usually have a very old martini or a Negroni, which I like. And I find that the vast majority, and I do try them, but the vast majority of the creative cocktails that are on menus these days, I just don't like. They just seem too aromatic, too something, I don't know. Oh, but I should also mention New Orleans, of course, is the cocktail town, and drinks like the Corpse Reviver, of which there are two versions, number one and number two, the Vieux Carré, and the Sazerac. Those are just wonderful cocktails, especially as made in New Orleans.
I'll have you know, by the way, having come back from New Orleans this very past weekend, that I had my first ever Sazerac.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
did you like it?
I liked it a lot. Yeah, I liked it a real lot. And I'm with you, by the way. I've never gotten into any of these, cocktails made by mixologists that have rosemary and these. There's just too much going on. I guess I'm kind of more of a purist. I'm happy with a martini. Are your martinis, by the way, a gin or vodka?
Martinis are made with gin.
Good, perfect. I just wanted to make sure that we were really clear on that because
I guess there's something called a vodka martini, but if you don't specify, it's made with gin.
No, good. I just wanted to make sure that we're good on that. I also noticed, by the way, that in our in the meal that we put together, that we didn't include dessert. So what I'd like to say to you is that I would rather have cheese after a meal than a sweet dessert.
Yeah,
okay.
Me too. I'm not a big sweet eater.
Well, let me quote you again, Mr. Andrews. You said, "Cheese may well be my greatest culinary vice. I love it, all kinds of it, soft, ripe, and hard, goat and sheep and cow, handcrafted and occasionally even crafted in the form, for instance, of Texas queso. If I go a day without making its acquaintance in some form or another, I feel diminished. If I could give up cheese entirely, I'm firmly convinced that I'd drop 40 pounds in a year, but me giving up cheese is no more likely than me giving up alcohol." So, that said, as a guy who is no cheese authority, speaking about myself, I like a good Parmigiano. I'm happy with French Gruyere, which I learned all about in cooking school. I will never forget when I had, I think it was the first time I had ever been to France, and I had Livarot, which I made the mistake. Oh my God, I made the mistake. Coleman, I brought it on the plane with me on the way back, I think illegally, and the whole plane by the end of the thing, it smelled like vomit. I'm happy with a nice aged Gouda, and I like a nice blue, whether it's going to be Stilton or Roquefort or Gorgonzola. But do me a favor and school me on cheese, please. What am I missing? What kind of cheese must I have that I haven't?
Well, one of the classics that you didn't mention is genuine English farmhouse cheddar.
Okay.
It's really nothing to do with the little bars of yellow stuff that you buy in the supermarket. I think there's so much good cheese made in this country now, and I think there's a cheesemaker in Georgia called Sweetgrass Dairy, and they have a soft, ripe cheese. It's like a sort of like a camembert style or something that is just extraordinary. Another one, which is actually called camembert, although it's not much like camembert, but it's really, really good, comes from New York State, from Old Chatham Sheep Herding Company. There's that style of soft, ripe, really good. Again, as I sort of said about the cheddar, if you get really good French from unpasteurized milk, brie, brie de Meaux, MEAUX, for instance, again, it's nothing like what you buy here, packaged up, cut into wedges and things, and it's really an extraordinary cheese, and the riper it gets, the more runny it gets. And I remember an English friend of mine said there's 3 stages of brie. There's firm, soft, and quick Mabel that's getting out the door.
Right.
And you get to that quick Mabel stage, and it's really wonderful. And you just spread it on a nice hunk of bread and crusty bread, and it's pretty great. If you go on and on about cheese, there's Parmigiano Reggiano as an eating cheese. If you get it, is really wonderful. It's great, obviously grated also, but that's pretty extraordinary. Really good Fontina from the Alps is one of my favorite cheeses. Roquefort is of all the blues, I think my favorite. Although I like Stilton and Gorgonzola too, and some American blues. There's so many different styles of cheese. I tend to gravitate, though, toward what they call the cooked cheeses, like the Gruyères and the Comté and the cheddars and things like that. Although, really, I like almost everything. The Livarot is not one of my favorites, I have to say.
Do you shop at Costco at all?
I don't. I probably should.
Well, all I'm going to say is people know me as the Costco ho. I'm there every week of my life, and all I'm going to tell you is that I can go into Costco any week, and I do. And here's the good. Here's the good and the limitation. I can buy real Parmesan Reggiano there. I think it's only going to be aged like, let's say, 2 years. I can buy Comté, which is lovely. So again, what I'm saying is from a price value standpoint and quality standpoint, it's fantastic.
Yeah, they also have a very good wine selection, apparently.
Well, if you're in Jersey, not in New York, in other words, you have to be in a state where it's okay. And yeah, I've saved a fortune. I mean, I bought a bottle of Bullet Bourbon there, like a giant bottle, like a 2-liter thing. And yeah, you save a fortune. What, like in this country, and we talked about kind of the progress and the fundamental kind of change in terms of what's available. There are trends that are good, and there are trends that are not so good. You know what I mean? What do you? And I'll give you the choice. What kind of trends do you see that you like, and what kind of trends do you really just despise? In terms of what's happening in food in this country, and I'm giving it to you broad. It can be what we eat. It can be it can be restaurants, whatever it is that you feel. For example, I'll start off. You know what I mean? Like I love Korean food, so I'm happy to see wherever I go now. Really find Korean food kind of popping up around the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first things I'd like to see go away is people thinking of food in terms of trends. I remember many years ago I was reading some magazine that had a list of things that are in and out this year.
Yeah.
And, cilantro is in and basil is out, and that kind of thing.
Silly, right?
I just looked at that and I said, basil's been around for 10,000 years.
Yeah,
or whatever.
It's not exactly out this year. Yeah, exactly.
An essential part of Italian, Thai, Indian, whatever, all these other cuisines.
Right.
And now it's out. Gee, I mean, poor basil. Who's going to tell him?
Right.
I think people are looking for trends because, and I have to say the media, which I've long been a part, are largely to blame. They need something to write about.
Right.
You got to write about the new trend or the hot new restaurant or the up and coming chef or things like that. And I'd rather just write about something that's good and not say this is a trend. That said, we can't do anything about it. And as you say, for instance, Korean food, which is very attractive in many ways, is getting disseminated much more than it was. I think Filipino food is probably next in that in that arena, which is also really good food. I would like to see Turkish food become much more popular. There's other foods like that. I think the kinds of trends I don't like are just people trying to one up each other and make food into something that's a trendy issue, so that you have you have people saying, well, you had that sauce. Well, I had that sauce made with this thing, and like it becomes a one-upping rather than a real enjoyment of food.
Let me ask you this on that. You've met, you've interviewed, you've spoken with, you've befriended a lot of great important chefs in your life. What separates? Do you think what separates the great chef from the average run-of-the-mill everyday kind of cook?
Well, I think it's interesting you use the word cook at the end there. I think the first thing you have to remember is that the word chef in French doesn't mean cook or very good cook or anything else. It means boss. And you can be the chef of a factory or the chef of whatever. Excuse me. The sense we're talking about is the chef de cuisine.
Right.
Okay, so the one that runs the kitchen. I think one great failing of a lot of chefs who are pretty well known, and I'm definitely not going to name names, is that they can't cook. And I think running a kitchen is not only about cooking, but I think it's essential that a chef know how to cook so that he or she can look at what other people are doing and say, no, you're not quite doing it right. Or you could do it better than you're doing it. I think being a great chef is not about ideas and innovation. Some great chefs are great because they're great innovators, Ferran Adrian and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not essential. Some people are great chefs because they're more or less traditionalists, and because they really are. They know technique, and they know the foundations of cuisine, and they just put out regularly and consistently very high quality food. I mean, that's the thing. I think the word consistency is very important. It's like when I play tennis, sometimes I hit a forehand or even a backhand that is just beautiful, and Nadal couldn't touch it,
Yeah.
But I only do that like once every 9,000 strokes.
Right.
So it's the consistency. It's doing it every single time. And I think that's with chefs. That's, you want somebody that either himself or herself, or more likely the people that work for the chef, are trained and motivated and are the right people to begin with, so that they can turn out really good, consistent food night after night after night. That's the really tough part.
Yeah.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think that's what makes a chef really, really. I don't like to throw the word great around, but a really fine chef is someone who has built a team, trained a team, motivated a team to produce the best possible quality of food night after night.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I have found myself repeating the same kind of phrase over and over again when it comes to restaurants, which to me is like the hallmark of greatness is like the consistency of excellence over time. And so you mentioned earlier this evening Le Bernardin, and I think Repair is like a classic example of this. This is 20 years in one of the most competitive restaurant cities in the world at the highest possible level, and it's no coincidence to me that the guy is one of the few kind of famed chefs who still controls one place versus 11.
Right, exactly. Yeah. That's true. On the other hand, I mean, not that every restaurant is of equal quality, but someone like Wolfgang Puck has a really good track record, and his places do tend to be remarkably consistent. And if you count all of his airport restaurants and everything else, he probably has hundreds.
Yeah. Well, you make a good point.
But I think also Eric Repair is really one of the top people anywhere, and I think I would put his cooking up against really just about anybody in France or Spain or whatever. But I think what I'm saying about consistency applies to the shopping mall Thai restaurant or the Mexican restaurant down the street or something like that too. And in many ways, it's more it's easier for those places because they're not trying to innovate in most cases.
Right.
They're cooking traditional food, and the people that are cooking the food are content to cook the same thing day after day after day after day.
Right.
In the same way.
Right.
They know how to do it. That's their art. They don't change. Which is great. That's not the only way to approach cooking, but I think that can be great too, and that's why those meals can be so satisfying.
What's the you cook at home, right?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Yeah.
So give me. I always like to ask people for my own. I mean, selfishly, I like to know what you would make that has the most taste with the fewest ingredients and the least effort. Like for me, for example, I can do a 2-ingredient dish and serve it anytime. What's the most taste, fewest ingredients, least effort dish in the Coleman Andrews repertoire?
Oh, it's probably cooking a steak.
Yeah, right. Okay, fine. That's fine. I'm good with that.
I mean, whether it's like we're getting into grill season now, so on the grill, or if I do it inside, I tend to sear it in butter with nothing but salt and pepper, and then put it in the oven to finish cooking.
What cut of the cow is your fave?
I'm very fond of ribeyes and New York strips, but ribeye I think is always a good solid thing. I do like marinating and grilling skirt steak.
Yes. With a nice, with a nice chimichurri on the side, maybe,
or whatever, yeah, or some Asian sauce or something. The problem with skirt steak is it's getting more and more expensive. It used to be half the price of ribeye, and now it's like just 10% less or something in many places.
I had this same complaint that I made to our celebrity butcher Dario. I said, when I first got into the city, I was buying hanger steak, otherwise known as the butcher's cut. I was paying $2.99. It became popular. It's $15.99 for this piece of diaphragm thing. It's
exactly.
In the 1 minute that we have remaining, let me ask you this: what is kind of like the best advice that you ever received about about food or wine? Can you think of that?
Best advice I ever received,
or skip it, and I'll give you another one.
Well, I can tell you that the best advice I ever received about wine, which
yes,
I'll take it. Long deceased now, who was my mentor in wine, is taste the wine. Don't worry about the label. Don't worry about the price. Don't worry about the name, what people say. Just taste the wine. If you like it, you like it. He was famous for people would say, he said, I don't like this wine. He'd say, what don't you like about it? He'd say, it's no good. Right. And that's all I needed to say. And I think there's so much pretension around wine, and I think if you find something you like, drink it and enjoy it, and don't worry about whether it's called Yellowtail or whether it's called Romani Conti.
All right, they have poked me to wrap it up in 30 seconds. Right. So I will say to you, first of all, thank you.
My pleasure.
It is a pleasure to speak with you. You are a fountain of not only information, but all the best information. Trust me when I tell you, I will be looking for Controy and some genuine English cheddar cheese.
Farmhouse cheddar.
Yeah, farmhouse cheddar. Thank you for doing this, and let me just say to everybody else who's here with us, episode number 12. My thanks to Coleman Andrews, worldwide food authority and otherwise good guy. Come on back next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time for episode number 13 of All You Can Eat. This is Rob Rosenthal reminding you life is short, so never waste a meal. Thank you.
Teflon pan man. I'm the Teflon pan man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on me.
Okay, disconnected the mic. How are you? That's great. Thank you. That was beautiful. I had that was great.